Hello everybody. Hello and welcome to Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Kermit Whitfield, CMC board member and Senior Assistant Vice President for Communications at United Way of Central Ohio. Welcome back to those of you who were here for the big table this morning. We had a great discussion. Today, CMC's forum, Give Me Shelter, is sponsored by Measurement Resources Company, Homeport, the Kelly Companies, and in partnership with Move to Prosper. Each are represented here today by many friends and associates. Won't you please help me thank them all? Today we discuss a basic need for all of us, that of shelter and a place to call home. While the Central Ohio market is hot for real estate, that doesn't necessarily translate into affordable housing. In fact, shelter is all but unattainable for far too many and for a variety of reasons. What can be done to address this situation? Let's talk to our experts. Please welcome Associate Dean, OSU College of Engineering and Chair of Move to Prosper Steering Committee, Rachel Cleet. Columbus City Council person, Jiza Page. Social researcher and GIS specialist at Kirwan Institute at The Ohio State University, Michael Outridge. And our host, President and CEO of Habitat for Humanity Mid-Ohio, and Chair of the Affordable Housing Alliance of Central Ohio, E.J. Thomas. E.J., the podium's yours.
Well, thank you very much. Without adequate housing, it is really difficult to have a vibrant community. As cliche as that might sound, it's something that we are rapidly seeing go from challenge to crisis unless we address it. Now, several years ago, Amy Claiborne, who's here with us, and part of Prosper, and I sat down, and we tried to figure out a way to be able to advocate more effectively across the nonprofit sector for all of the different organizations that are part of trying to create a solution. And we formed the alliance so that we could show on a continuum exactly where the bright lines are between what it is that we do, the different tranches of dollars that are accessed, and the idea being that we could generate more interest for affordable housing because we're all working together and not perceived to be working apart. We did a research report, found that 54,000 families in this area are paying more than half of their income or severely cost burdened for housing. So we're advocating, as many of us are, for new public, private, and philanthropic resources to construct, repair, maintain, provide rent assistance for our families. Earlier this year, we released a $140 million three-year startup plan to accomplish all three of these goals. We're grateful to have the city's support. Our folks are here from the City Development Department, the $20 million for the Southside Renaissance Fund, and the Affordable Housing Trust. Steve Gladman, I see you out there. Thank you for your support for us for nearly 3 years. So we're excited. And we know in looking at Austin, Denver, Seattle, Nashville, and Charlotte, that we have the opportunity in Central Ohio to get out ahead of this curve. Because if you look at Seattle, for instance, you've been reading what's been happening out there, it went from challenge to crisis to nightmare. And as fast as we are growing here, there's no reason why we should allow that to happen here. So, Rachel, I'll start with you. You were with us from the very beginning, putting the alliance together and working on these housing issues. And I know that Ohio State is very involved in this issue from a planning perspective, since that's your background.
Yep. So I guess what I want to say about this is that I'm here as the chair of Move to Prosper. And one of the reasons we started Move to Prosper was because we saw that the housing crisis that's going to be happening here in Columbus. And what is it, 75% of those who qualify for housing subsidies in the United States don't get them. So that means that when we're talking about Section 8 or talking about other kinds of subsidies, we're talking about a very small portion of the people who actually need some sort of support so that they're not shelter burdened, so that they're not paying so much of their income for rent that they can't pay for other things. And then the question is, what do people do if they do get that support? Where do they live? Where can they find housing? If people can't afford to live, and they can't pay more than, I don't know, a third of their income for rent, where are they going to find housing if they make $20,000 a year? The $54,000 household number that you talk about, EJ, is actually households at $20,000 a year or less of income. So if you think about people working every day full-time who earn $40,000 and are trying to support a family, they're still cost burdened. So actually that number might even be an undercount of the number of people, the number of households that actually need support.
Wow.
So one of the questions is, where is the affordable housing? Is it all in one place? Is it in places where there are good schools, where there's safety? Do people have choices about where they live? So these are the kinds of questions that we're thinking about a lot when we create Move to Prosper, which is meant to support single women who choose to move to a new neighborhood with their kids and help them transition to that place, learns the skills that they want to learn with regard to financial management, health, if they want to set job goals, that would be something they can do. But this is really about giving people the choice to make different aspects of their life work better for them.
Well, thank you. And of course, single mothers obviously are raising a family. Michael, I know that you have a personal story that I think relates to the work that you're doing now and the schooling that you have put yourself through. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll make sure I keep it moving along. So essentially, yeah, so first off, I aged out of the foster care system up in Cleveland. So in terms of family ties and other things, I don't have much of that. But despite all of that, I moved down to do my undergrad at Ohio University, and I struggled, and I was actually homeless while going through school. The wait list for affordable housing in Southeast Ohio was really long. It was 2.5 years to be able to find a place. I was able to figure out a way staying on campus, which was nice, but when it came to move off campus, I didn't have a cosigner. So I had to pay the rent, the entire year's rent in full, because I didn't have a cosigner. And I did that even when I got accepted into Ohio State for grad school to do my master's in city and regional planning. And for those 2 years, I, again, had to pay the full year's rent up front ahead of time because I didn't have a cosigner and my credit history wasn't long enough. And so it worked really, really hard to work around a budget to make sure that all was accommodated and fine. And so now I work full time, and I'm still facing some of these slight challenges and barriers.
Michael, share us a little bit about the GIS work that you're doing.
Yeah, certainly. So I work at the Curran Institute, and I look at their opportunity mapping initiatives, looking at places around various regions that we partner with that have areas that have high opportunity, areas that have access to high opportunity. So good schools, good adequate housing, good transportation, good job access. And then areas that lack that and don't have as much resources. And so when you're able to look at that, you're able to be able to compare areas with each other at the regional level, and you're able to target resources effectively. And so that's one of the projects. I also do some food mapping work, looking at food insecurity. And then outside of Kerwin, I am the youth advisory, youth action board for Columbus for their youth homelessness demonstration project. So there was a $6.1 million grant that was awarded to address youth homelessness in Columbus. And so I'm on the youth action board because trying to get more youth input because I've lived that experience and I want to address that and grow that voice as they're trying to change that policy.
Well, Michael, you have a unique background, and it would seem to me that throughout your career, you're going to be able to add a lot of value, not only to the institution where you're working, but also to young people who may never know your name. So thank you. Councilwoman Page hit the ground running. Some of us from the Alliance went in to speak with her when she first became a member of City Council. And all of us were impressed with how eager she was to learn more about this issue, because there are a lot of moving parts to making affordable housing work. She now is chair of the Housing and Economic Development Committee. So given your experience with council so far, what are your thoughts?
I just want to thank Michael first for sharing your story with us. And for me, that's really why talking about affordable housing and having this conversation is so important, because that 54,000 number that we hear, those are real lives that are being impacted. Those are individuals in our community each and every day who are looking for a safe and decent, affordable house to live in. We receive emails constantly at City Council, the Department of Development, for single mothers who are looking for a place to live. They have multiple children. They want to send them to the best school that they can, but they can only afford $600-700 a month for rent. And to them, that's still a stretch. And for me, again, it's really being impacted by those stories and trying to do the best that we can to affect and change those lives. And I'm so proud of my colleagues on council, Mayor Ginther, for the work that we've done most recently and passed legislation in July around our incentive policy, which really has a focus on affordable housing. Now, how we define that, we're constantly thinking, what does affordable housing mean? We have a lot of different ways to look at it, but we are focusing with this legislation on working families and requiring developers throughout the city in our post-1994 CRA areas, hope I got that right, Director Shoney, to provide 20% of their units, 10% to 80 AMI, and another 10% to 100% below AMI to those families. And that is a great step in the right direction. We know there's a lot more work that needs to be done, but I am proud to work with a council and a mayor who has affordable housing as a priority.
Well, thank you very much. Dr. Cleet, excuse me, let me come back to you. We've all heard the numbers that over the next 15, 20, 30 years, we're going to have 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 more folks here in the area. With your degree in urban planning, you're in a position to see through a set of filters in a way that we can't, that may help to put a box around exactly what we're getting into, where we can expect growth in the city, and how we need to maybe look at the affordable housing issue in the context of that incredible growth.
So I would think I would put this in the context of Insight, I'm going to get the name wrong, Insight 2030, 2040, right? I can't even get the name right. I didn't know I was going to talk about this. 2050, I'm sorry. So I can tell you the content, 2016, I mean, I was thinking about that. Maybe we need to go out another year. Insight 2050, which is MORPC's, the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission's effort to do some scenario planning about how we might take this growth. And there are scenarios at either end of the spectrum. One is we continue growing out and we grow on greenfields, or we take it all in our current urbanized form, urbanized footprint, or there are two scenarios in the middle. And I think that the region working together has come to the understanding that they're going to be somewhere in the middle. So that means what we should be seeing is more infill, more dense development like we might see in Franklinton, which looks very different than a lot of what's there now. But even on High Street, we see a lot more density on High Street. And so some of these incentives that we're seeing are really aimed at that land use pattern, trying to change what that pattern looks like. And it's what has been interesting about this to me is that there's no mandate for us to all work together in Central Ohio. But we have, and the different municipalities have been implementing guidelines that allow for us to take this growth in a way that will enhance the richness and diversity of our region. I think the question is, though, when you're talking about developing housing, a lot of the rental housing especially is coming in at the top end. And we would have to build a lot of new luxury housing in order to have filtering happen to a great enough extent that we could house 54,000 people in an affordable manner. And even then, those are not going to be good units necessarily that they're living in. And so the question is, do you want to live, if you're raising a family, do you want to live in a unit that is filtered through the market like that? So for a lot of people, affordable housing means low market, Class D rental. But again, do you want to live there? Where would you want to live and raise your family? So I think so as a region, we need to come together to talk about how do we preserve affordable housing where it exists now, like on the south side or in the east side. How do we invest enough so that homeowners who own housing now in those neighborhoods are not pushed out? How do we change our tax codes? And then how do we build housing that's actually already affordable? And how do we make our subsidies last over time? Which is some of the discussion that we're having now in Columbus about a land trust uses a subsidy that you pay once and you don't have to pay it again. Right now, every time we have the end of a subsidy period for affordable housing, we have to re-up that money and find it. So long-term affordability is a more efficient way for us to be setting up our long-term, long-term affordability is a way to think long-term, how's that, about a future of affordable housing.
Thank you. And one of the ways that many of the nonprofits that are involved in affordable housing are trying to help with the density issue is to work pretty diligently on the repair piece. I know Homeport's got a great repair program. We're working with them as Habitat, and there are many others out there that are trying to figure out a way to preserve what already exists, because you've got a lot of folks in these areas who bought their homes 35, 40 years ago, paid it off 20 years ago. They would love to age in place, but they can't afford the fixes that inevitably are going to occur or to be needed on a home, nor are they physically able to handle them on their own. And so for our organizations to step in and help with that, we cover a lot of different markers with just a simple repair. Michael, I'd be interested, as you look forward, what you see in the Central Ohio area.
That's a very good question. Yeah, it's really tricky depending on what scenario we pick, right? If we do more infill or we do more greenfield development. One of the things that is key to look at is looking at obviously, the city of Columbus, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this in a way that is constructive. Well, like, yeah.
Now, there's a setup.
Yeah, right. So obviously, when it comes to income inequality, that's growing nationwide, as well as poverty, right? And so one of the research things that I've looked at in terms of the trajectory of poverty in Franklin County is not only is it staying concentrated in certain areas, like in Hilltop, in Linden, but it's also spreading out. It's staying mostly within the Columbus City School, City of Columbus boundaries, but it's spreading out, and it's growing in numbers, and so the number of people in poverty, that is. And so if we don't find ways to address that with the affordable housing component, we're going to see spikes in homelessness and other detrimental impacts that come with that. And so I hope, if we all work together and address this issue head on while we have the opportunity, because like if Amazon headquarters 2 comes here, like what it will do to housing and cost in housing would be a concern that I would have personally. And so it all depends on a variety of different variables, right? That's kind of how this is. No city's mastered this, their affordable housing completely. There's always going to be need. There's always limited resources. But again, as long as we realize that we're working with an a la carte menu and we all have funding in place and we can work together to share pools of funding to address this problem, I think we'll definitely make significant progress.
So can I add something to that, Michael? Mm-hmm. One of the things I think it's important to realize is that for folks who are renting in that part of the bottom part of the market is that they're housing unstable. And so they have very little control over their income or over things that happen in the marketplace. And so the response is to take control. These folks are, they're trying to do the best they can, and so they move. They're very housing unstable. They move a lot. Like, they may move once a year. They may move more than once a year, once every 3 years. So what impact does that housing instability have on children, on families, on the ability to hold a job, the ability to stay healthy, to exercise, take care of yourself, cook meals, all of those things? And so housing, so we have these issues of inequality, of income inequality, and we see spatial inequality increasing. And we're, I think, according to Urban City Lab or something, we're like the second most, I think it's Richard Florida's group, we're the second most income segregated region in the United States, at least as of a few years ago. And that's increasing. And so that has a huge impact on people's lives, given the instability that people face in the marketplace. And so if we want to actually continue to be a prosperous region, we need to really address this.
Well, you're absolutely right, Rachel. And I think that we had Dr. Megan Sandell here a couple of years ago, and she has the best soundbite in the world for the need for housing, and that's the vaccine. And when you think about having to move every 2 or 3 months, if you have a child who is going to a different school system, trying to socialize with new friends, get on board with a new curriculum, then come home and study in something that is considered substandard housing, where maybe there's not enough room, where you can't get away so that you can study, and you have siblings that are doing what siblings always do, and that's drive their brothers and sisters crazy. It makes it very difficult for a child to stay on some sort of a glide path that's going to lead to success. So, Councilwoman Page, you have folks coming into your office all the time as a function of just being available to your constituents. We, as the affordable housing community, are part of that constituency. And so how could we be more effective? Are there things that we should be doing that we're not doing in order to garner the attention of policymakers and increase the amount of traction that we have?
Well, I actually would say that I think that the Affordable Housing Alliance and other advocates in this space are doing a great job. Definitely with educating elected officials on a local level and state level as well on the issues that our residents are facing. You give us the numbers, we have graphs, we have a lot of information. So I've found the relationship and the communication with you all has been amazing, and I truly appreciate it. And I think now it's really just buckling down and looking at the most vulnerable population, which again, I know that the city is really trying to focus on that too, and figuring out what we can do for individuals that they really need their rent to be subsidized. And it needs to be long-term, and so that we can figure out how to move them to the next place in life. And it's providing those wraparound services, looking at wages. I mean, this is truly a multifaceted problem that we have to address from a lot of different ways and a lot of different resources. But I do believe that the conversation and that the relationship right now is great. It's just everybody getting on board and moving forward.
Oh, good. Thank you. Rachel, let me come back to you. We talked about some of these other cities that are in dire straits. If you were to go to them, if you could turn the clock back, jump in your DeLorean and what would you say to a Seattle 10 years ago or 15 years ago to help them avert the crisis that they're in right now?
Actually, I lived in Seattle 15 years ago, so.
What did you, well, then the question is, what did you tell them?
Actually, what they should have been doing 15 years before that. So if you're anticipating growth, and certainly Seattle was anticipating growth at that time, that's the time before the crisis hits to land bank. And we're land banking right now. We do land bank, and that's appropriate. That's the time to get land cheaply, so that then it can be turned over for the construction of affordable housing, and that housing should be high quality. One of the things that Seattle did do was they had a linkage program. So you could build taller in the city, because, you know, everything in Seattle is about views, right? Like the views of Mount Rainier, views of the bay, right? So if you could build taller, you had to pay for it. And that money went into a fund to build affordable housing in other neighborhoods in the area, in the region. I think Boston has a similar linkage program, maybe in the 80s, actually, for a very, very long time. So I think there's But the reason you have to start early, so I think we're in a good place now. We still have places where you can get a rental house pretty cheaply. We should be preserving those houses. We have been a city where we've not had as much tear downs of our vacant housing, right? And that's an opportunity to the extent that it can be repaired. Because it's the most expensive thing about a house is the land. And so if you can get the land cheaply, you can build other housing. That's what I would say in Seattle. The other thing that I would say is to form a land trust early on. Durham did that in North Carolina. Burlington, Vermont has the oldest land trust in the nation. And I don't, actually, it doesn't have to be a land trust. It could be any kind of housing that is permanently affordable and shared equity housing. I think that's really the only way to preserve affordable housing over the long term without continuing government support is with these shared equity models that allow for an investment and the preservation of that investment over time.
Let me follow that up. As you look at other cities, those who would throw up their hands might say that, well, you know, once you get so big, this is just going to be a crisis and there's not much you can do about it. So whether you're Austin, Denver, Seattle, Nashville, or Charlotte, you're all going to be in the same boat. That's just the price you're paying for all this tremendous growth. My guess is, Rachel, that you see some differences that are nuanced enough that we might be able to learn from those going forward.
Well, so I think some places that have had inclusionary housing have actually been getting rid of it. So California has, or had, state-mandated inclusionary housing, and that has been slowing down there. Massachusetts, as a state, has an inclusionary housing program that allows, there's an idea that every jurisdiction, there are 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts, that each of them has to have 11% of their housing as affordable. I don't know how they got to 11%, but they did. And so a developer can come in to a town and propose a development that's affordable, and the town, they have to accept it, unless they've done some other kind of planning to make arrangements for affordable housing. And so that's Chapter 40B in Massachusetts. So a lot of these, so I guess one of the things I always wonder about with inclusionary housing is when you have extraordinary income inequality, and you have one jurisdiction in a fragmented region doing inclusionary housing, you're not really creating affordable housing where it exists. And you also have to do extraordinary community development in those places, make sure there's good schools, are safe, you have good infrastructure. But what about the other places? And kids grow up. And what about families who don't want to live in those neighborhoods? Lots of families want to stay, but some families don't, and they don't have the wherewithal or the money to move. So I think that if you do inclusionary housing, it has to be on the regional level or even at the state level, because you have to cover the entire market area in order for it to be truly effective.
Thank you. Well, Michael, you work at OSU, and Dr. Cleet works at OSU. Do you agree with everything she's saying?
Well, I don't know if you noticed. Yeah, obviously, yes. Yes, absolutely. That would be very ideal, actually, honestly, to have it at a regional scale so that other jurisdictions, because if you think about it, right, if you're a jurisdiction that has the resources and the good schools and the good property taxes and other things like that, what's your incentive other than wanting to I don't want to say altruistic, but like unless you want to do it in good heart, right? You don't have it from a purely economical standpoint, right? You may not want to part with other areas that could get you a higher return. And so having a regional scale or a larger scale affordable housing model like that, where everybody has their fair share in a way, gets at that and allows, it works in a way that makes sure everybody's paying that. And that helps with getting those people into better places and having them have some choice, right? And so, because I liked what you mentioned about choice initially, right? If you think about your situation, right, and you have X number of dollars, however much money you make a year, right, and you think, okay, well, where can I live so I'm not cost burdened? Where can I live, right? What community, what house can I get? Where can I stay, right? Typically, as your income drops, you have less of a choice. So the lower your income is, the less chance you have, to be able to find a place unless you get roommates, or are there certain situations, right? And that's what I do. That's how I'm able to make ends meet, because I have roommates and it works. But, if I had kids, I don't think I'd want roommates, but to be able to afford to live in an area that would require me to do so, you have to make those sacrifices.
So I also want to add one other Seattle story, if I may. So Seattle implemented growth management in 1990 and put urban growth boundaries around their urban centers. And of course, an urban growth boundary restricts the amount of land, which can drive up prices. So, but there was an affordable housing component to the plan, and so the East Side communities on the east shore of Lake Washington, very wealthy communities, got together and created something called a Regional Coalition for Housing, where they paid general fund monies into a central trust fund and used it to create deed-restricted housing. And they've been doing that for 30 years. 30 years, 20 years, whatever. And so it's managed out of the city of Bellevue, Washington, and it was their response because they wanted to control how that happened. And so it's all single-family homes with a deed restriction, and it's sold to the next person at an affordable price.
So Michael, Councilwoman Page, do you want to add something? No, please, jump in.
Well, just going on, what we've been talking about, and I really do believe that's one area where we can improve. I think Columbus has really taken the lead on talking about affordable housing in our community, but it has to be a regional approach and a regional conversation, especially as we look at this 2050 plan. Everyone is not going to move into Columbus. When we think about the Worthington School District, I believe 40% of their students are on free or reduced lunch, and that's in the Worthington School District. A lot of them do live in Columbus, so they're in that win-win district, but all those parents aren't going to necessarily want to stay in Columbus, and they're going to be looking at this entire region for affordable housing options, for school options, and jobs. And for me, we do have to come together as local leaders, as development directors, as auditors, whoever you are, to really talk about this on a much larger scale and figure out how we can provide those options for everyone.
I told you that she was taking her job as it relates to affordable housing seriously. Thank you very much. Now, Michael, I just have to ask before we go to suggest that you all come up with your questions. Did you get a ride down today from Dr. Cleet?
I did not.
No, because you agreed with her so quickly, I thought, his ride's in jeopardy here. What we'd like to do, as always is the format here for the Metropolitan Club, is to provide the opportunity for folks to ask questions. So in the next few minutes, I know there's a mic back there, Andy, or is it right there? Gotcha. You can see Andy pointing to it. So if you have questions, please feel free to queue up there at the mic, and in a couple minutes, we will take those questions. As we come to the end here, before the questions, are there any recap kind of comments that you would like to make? Michael, we'll start with you.
Yes, certainly. I really appreciated the conversation on kind of what was talked about today, and I've seen some name tags and some other different organizations here that are interested in this topic, and so I thank you all for attending and sharing your interest in this.
Councilwoman Page?
I echo Michael's thank yous. And also, just as you lead today, really understanding that, again, that number, that 54,000, these are real lives. And when many of us were 16 years old, excluding Michael, we went to school from our home that we maybe lived in since we were a child. But there are 16-year-old students who are getting picked up from the shelter or getting picked up from a home or their friend's home because they don't have their own roof over their head. And we definitely need to make sure that we are thinking about them each and every day and what we're doing.
And I think that really speaks to the pressing nature of this problem. People grow up fast. And so what do we do now? So I always think about the perfect is the enemy of the good. The perfect solution would be to fix the system that created this. It would be to get a lot more subsidy dollars from perhaps government sources, but we don't see that happening soon. Maybe from Columbus, excuse me, but not from the federal government. This is really a local deal at this point. The federal government has retrenched. This has devolved down to us, and it's a pressing problem. And even at the current level that it's at, it's a pressing problem. Never mind what will happen in 10 years.
Thank you. Well, it is that time, and folks have taken us up on our offer. So if you would state your name and then state your question, and please keep in mind that if there isn't a question mark at the end, then you're making a speech. So this is question time.
My name is Sana Barrett, and this question is for Dr. Cleet. Can you tell us more about Move to Prosper, and if rental support is needed, where is the funding for it?
All right. So Move to Prosper has 10 families right now, it's a pilot project, to help single moms move to neighborhoods where there are opportunities, good schools, good jobs, and safety. And they make the choice that they want to move to these neighborhoods. We have currently 10 families, 20 kids who've moved into suburban school districts this year. And they've just moved in, so they just started school. The goal is not only housing, though, because it's not just about housing. Housing programs don't solve economic problems. They don't solve job problems or human capital problems. So moving is not enough. When the women were asked what did they want the most, they said they wanted financial management help. That was the thing. A lot of them can't live in some of these neighborhoods normally because their credit scores are terrible, or they have evictions on their records. So one of the things that Move to Prosper is doing, we're working with landlords to adjust those expectations about credit and eviction history, with the promise that we're going to work with them and help them stabilize in the housing. So we're very much on the ground working out very specific problems and also giving very specific opportunities around job opportunities, training, financial management, health, and also mobility counseling. So that's Move to Prosper. Now, you asked where the subsidies come from. That's a great question. Because, again, as I said, the federal government seems uninterested in they're maintaining their costs right now, which was nice, who knew that, but seems uninterested in increasing the investment in affordable housing. And so personally, what I'd like to see is a full investment in the National Affordable Housing Trust Fund, first of all, have that be fully funded, so we have another stream of housing. We could bond fund. We could have braided funds from private developers. But housing subsidy, if it's a housing support for rental subsidy, that's maybe there's social investment we can be doing, the social bond somehow. We have a certain number of people who are served by it, and as a result, we get paid back. We get, someone invests, you have companies who invest in the good, and if you produce that good, then they get a return. Then we get to keep the money that they basically invested. So there are ways of doing this. They are not going to be at the scale that government funding could be.
All right, thank you. And the next question.
I'm Glennon Sweeney, and I really appreciate the conversation, and I couldn't agree more that a regional approach to maybe a fair share policy would be fantastic. But I look, and there's a City of Columbus table here, and I don't see a City of Bexley or Dublin or Worthington table here, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how to engage other jurisdictions in a regional conversation.
Glennon, and a lot of the information that I have about suburban poverty actually comes from Glennon. So if you have questions, I know she's amazing. She works at the Kirwan Institute, and we didn't plant this question, by the way, but it's really engaging the various jurisdictions around Columbus, and again with that 2050 plan, helping them understand that this is a problem for all of us. It's not just Columbus, and if you don't see it now, you will see it in 2050, and it'll be too late then. And it's really, again, having those conversations, and as you were saying, this is a problem that we need to address today.
Hi, my name is Steve Heiser. As we've been discussing, it seems to be a problem with many, many aspects to it. I guess I'd ask Dr. Cleet, what does the big data research show about children, especially who grow up in low opportunity neighborhoods? And is there a region that has begun to successfully move toward a multifaceted approach that helps solve this problem? This housing problem. because building single-family homes or even multifamily homes is a very expensive way to build housing. Thank you.
Yeah, it certainly is more affordable to provide rental subsidies for people. It's cheaper for the investment, frankly, but they're not permanently affordable. And you can't, and people may not be living in the neighborhoods. They may have to live in neighborhoods where there aren't good schools, et cetera, because the vouchers or the rental subsidy isn't accepted everywhere. So the question is, though, he asked about big data. So Nathan Hedren and Raj Chetty have done a study have looked at the 20-year results from the Moving to Opportunity study, which was in 5 cities starting in about 1990 around the United States. 5,000 families randomly assigned into 5,000, public housing families randomly assigned into Section 8 voucher, a Section 8 voucher with counseling and having to use that voucher in a place with 20% poverty or less, and then no impact, no voucher at all. And there weren't the 10-year results were not very promising. The only thing was that for girls, for teenage girls, they had higher self-esteem, and I think we're less likely to have a teenage pregnancy if they lived in an area that had less than 20% poverty. The 20-year results, though, show that there is a lifetime earning difference for the kids who even spent a year in a non-poor neighborhood. And that's about a $300,000 difference in their lifetime earnings. So these kids are probably in their 30s now. And then other big data work so they did that by matching a lot of big data to find the people who were in those studies. The other big data they've looked at is they've been able to locate people in their county and then see where they grew up and where they end up. And people who are white tend to stay, and if they're in a white neighborhood and a non-poor neighborhood also, they tend to stay there. People of color are not getting there, and if you grow up in poverty, you're more likely to stay in a poor neighborhood. We don't have a lot of mobility right now for people who start out in poverty or for people of color. And again, this is a problem. If we're going to become a majority-minority society, we have to do something about this.
Dr. Cleet, as it relates to Move to Prosper, I assume you're assembling a data set as you go along with the work that you're doing there?
Well, so we just have 10 people right now.
So it's a very small data set.
So right now it's a very small data set. Yeah, Jason Reese is the evaluator for this project because I'm the chair. I can't do both of these things because it's a conflict of interest. We are raising money right now to do a demonstration project with hopefully 100 families and then comparison groups as well. But we wanted to first figure out what we needed to do. So we started this with a small group of like 5 people talking about what would it look like to do a rental subsidy program that wasn't funded by the government. Because this pressing issue was really bothering us. Like these kids are growing up and people can't move and they can't do the things they want to do for their families. What are we going to do? And so, again, I don't want the good the perfect is the enemy of the good, okay? There's a short-term subsidy for 3 years. Again, because where are you going to find the money for this? So hopefully we will learn enough in the pilot to be able to do a real demonstration program. And the pilot data, which we are accumulating, will help us hopefully raise that money.
And so you would anticipate getting to 100 families when? Or is that fungible given that you're...
That's fungible given, yeah. I think we were hoping to be able to start in a year, but I don't know how that's going to work. The steering committee is trying to figure out, and our partners are trying to figure that out. But I think I know that we're learning so much right now from just doing this that we have to talk again about what our plans are.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, next question, please.
Hello, my name is Marcus Roth, and I'm with the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing Ohio. So we've been talking about these issues for many years. It's kind of gratifying to hear this conversation at this level and see that, the media is really paying more attention to it as well. Columbus Business First has been doing a great series on the affordable housing crunch, the dispatch, and it's gratifying to see the city take up this issue as well. But as a lot of you have said, it's going to take more than just localities looking at this issue. We need partnership with the state and federal leaders. So unfortunately, as we approach the election season, we haven't heard a whole lot about housing, affordable housing, from the candidates running for office for the state and federal offices. So I guess my question would be, what do we need to do to get this issue of affordable housing on the agenda for the next leaders of the state?
Paige, why don't we ask you to take a whack at that?
No problem. And it's, again, knocking on their doors, scheduling meetings, and letting them know that this is a pressing issue. And if they're not willing to listen, go to the next person and talk to them. And then holding them accountable when they're on the ballot again. You know, I am so honored and proud of our local officials, Mayor Ginther, President Hardin, and the rest of my council colleagues who have affordable housing as their priority. And I know that there are conversations going on with our neighboring jurisdictions, with other mayors, but for the state and federal levels, it's really just going to them and saying, this is an issue for our residents, and this is an issue that we need you to address right now.
Thank
And
you.
if you need my help, let me know. I'll go with you.
And from the Wineland Park Collaborative?
My name is Susan Colbert, and I would like to direct this question to Dr. Cleet. In reference to the Move to Prosper initiative, can you elaborate on how the community, civic, corporate, and church partners could support the work of this initiative or even expand to that 100 people or more?
So one of the things that's been interesting to me about doing this, starting from nothing and going to something over the past couple of years, is that we've talked to hundreds of people about this locally, and people who I don't think of as being normally in the affordable housing community. So if people want to get involved, they can certainly donate money. There are volunteers. I think that there are things people can do in their communities. What I think you probably should be doing is using your vote in a way that supports affordable housing. Ask your candidates about it. If you think it's important, we can walk up, we have power to do something about it. But I think that the power of philanthropy is important, the power of local action is important, and I have to say, this is a unique region to have this conversation.
Very good.
I'm Jane Scott with the Metropolitan Club. As we are improving lots and lots of different neighborhoods, from Old Oaks to Franklinton to Victorian Village, University District, I'm assuming that property values are going up, and I'm also assuming that the base property taxes are going up. Are we forcing some folks out of their houses because they can't pay their property taxes anymore? And is there any way that someone's been in a home for maybe even decades, that property tax could be grandfathered or something that would allow that person to maintain that home and not be a victim of gentrification?
That's a great question, and yes, unfortunately, families are being displaced as property taxes are rising and just the cost of living is rising as well. That is an issue that will have to be addressed from a state level, and I know that we are, talking to our state leaders and hope that that can be something that can be addressed, because we are very aware of it here on the local level, as many of the neighborhoods that you have talked about are places where particularly aging residents are being displaced because they can no longer afford the property taxes.
That's one of the issues that could be addressed depending on how a land trust would get put together, because the investment that's placed in it has to stay with that property. So there's a natural braking action in terms of selling a home and dampening the demand in that area. So that may be one area that can help. One more question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yes, I really appreciate this forum, and I can't say that I don't agree with everything all three of you said, all four of you said, I guess. But we talked a lot about how we can fund affordable housing, And there seems to be a stereotype, and I talk to a lot of young amateur investors that buy a house in an affordable neighborhood, fix it up, rent it, and then I talk to them 6 months later and they say, the people wrecked the house, I didn't get my rent, I'm selling the house. As I said, it could be a stereotype, but are we doing anything to educate renters to know how to care for a house and budget their money to, you mentioned, Doctor, there was a complicated issue, but I think we need to do it with the masses so that we can get rid of that stereotype, because I think that keeps a lot of people out of those kind of investments. And I think that is one of the answers to the problem. Like you said, renovating affordable housing and in affordable neighborhoods and renting it to people at affordable rents. Thank you.
One thing that council has been doing, we have been hosting eviction prevention, also like tenant rights, tenant responsibilities workshops across the city. We've done about 6 or 7 and are scheduling 3 to 4 more throughout the course of the year. And it includes not only what your rights are as a tenant, but also your responsibility. And I would say that sometimes lack of education can be a barrier to receiving affordable housing, because you need that education in order to, budget management, just family, crisis management.
Thank you very much, panel. Kermit, I'll throw it back to you.
Thank you very much, EJ, and thank you, speakers. I hope you all enjoyed today's forum. And I would just point out, when I was in the big table discussion in the morning, in our table, the very first topic that came up was affordable housing. So I know this is something that's on a lot of people's minds. So we encourage you to continue the conversation with coffee and cookies. And guests, we'd love to have you join CMC. You can do this at the CMC patio under the lovely summer umbrella in the back there. And remember, this is a note from Jane, right? She says, remember to make your reservations for CMC's next Wednesday before you go on Labor Day vacation, so you don't forget about it. And I'd like to thank our sponsors, Homeport, the Kelly Companies, Measurement Resources Company, and our partner, Move to Prosper, and our speakers, Rachel Cleet, Jiza Page, Michael Outrich, and EJ Thomas. And thanks to all of you for being here. We'll see you next week.